Welcome to Mind, America's Lignite Energy Podcast, brought to you by the Lignite Energy Council of North Dakota. Here's your hosts, Kate Muggerud and Geoff Simon.
And welcome. Hello to all of our new guests that we have on the show today. This is Mind, Lignite Energy in America. Thank you again for joining us on this episode. I have my co-host, Geoff Simon. Geoff, say hi.
Hello, everyone.
And y'all, today we have a really great episode. I have the pleasure of having three really great guests on the show today. We're going to dive into, and I think this is a new topic for a lot of our listeners and our viewers, the Lignite Research Council. So I don't recall ever diving into this in season one, but it's something that's going to be really great for us to discuss today. I have Cliff. Cliff, introduce yourself. Welcome, Cliff Porter.
I was a technical director of the program probably about 30 years ago. Held that position for the first 10 years or 12 years. And when I arrived at the program, John Dwyer was heading the effort, and it was a joint effort between the Industrial Commission and representatives of industry. It was truly a public-private partnership. What I found when I got there was an initial scoping study that had been drawn up by a man by the name of Signer. And we referred to the Signer report for years. And what he did is he attempted to look at possibilities, strengths, and opportunities of the lignite industry in North Dakota. So that coupled that with the legislative backing that was obtained, we were able to put together a idea of a program, and so that's about where it started.
That's pretty cool. Thanks for joining us, Cliff. We appreciate it, and I'm excited to kind of pick your brain a little bit more today. Guys, we also have Mike Jones on the call. Mike, say hi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I joined the Lignite Energy Council in 2009 after about 30 years with the Energy Environmental Research Center in Grand Forks. And I was there until I retired in 2016 and was able to hand it off to Mike Holmes. There were two individuals that were between myself and Cliff. Unfortunately, both of them are deceased and aren't able to be with us, of course. And all of them made a major contribution. And I do have to say that I think Cliff is really a very important person in the history of this program, because Cliff was the one who really put it together. And the rest of us who came later, we really built on what he had done. So I owe a debt of gratitude to Cliff for what he did to start this out.
That was very kind of you, Mike. It was really a joint effort. And we had representatives from industry, which I think were key to work with representatives in the public sector. So it was a joint opportunity. I had been fortunate to work with the Energy and Environmental Research Center before I joined the Lignite Energy Council, the Lignite Research Council. So I had some background and familiarity with people like Mike Jones, who are qualified and excellent researchers.
Awesome. Well, Mike, Cliff, thanks for joining us. And our third guest is Mike Holmes. Mike, thanks for being here.
Matt, I'm excited to be part of this. Thank you, Kate.
Absolutely. And Mike, for our viewers, just a little background with you in your position.
It sounds like I can just about mirror everyone else's background. So 30 years worth of research and development in coal-fired power production and control of emissions, things like that. So 15 years at Babcock and Wilcox, and then 15 years at the Energy and Environmental Research Center. And after Mike Jones left and I became the second Mike, Cliff, you should have been named Mike and it would have been easier here. And so I took over that role, and one of the first things I did was familiarize myself with the program and the project management side of things, and thought I was going to start documenting some of the project management requirements. And I'll echo what Mike Jones said on how good a job Cliff did in the early days of lining this up, because I found everything I needed in terms of project expectations and the process already out there on the computer archives. And so that made it easier to just fall right into place. And the other thing we talk about is the history of the program on the technology front. A lot of that early work Cliff did, we continue making progress on. So that was also laying out the needs as we went. And one of the topics today can be the evolution of the R&D program portfolio, and what Mike Jones later worked on called the roadmap. And a lot of that still stands today, the roadmap for what technology needs there are in the state.
The one thing I'm curious about, I guess, Cliff, you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but what was the real impetus behind getting this started? Was there a threat to the industry, or was there a sense there were missed opportunities? What was really the impetus?
Initially, the effort was directed towards more of the reclamation activity, and there was a need to bring closure with some of the regulations that were being drafted and practices in the industry. And it evolved from that, I think, as a result of some of the progress that was seen in that area. The program was expanded and more funding was allowed. So I think it kind of grew out of the reclamation, but it was broadened then into the other areas of the research that was required for the industry.
Yeah, it's amazing how many accomplishments it's really come up with over the years when you look through the list of things that have done. And now we're looking into carbon capture and Project Tundra and things like that. Mike Jones, during your tenure there, it was kind of an OMG moment when the Clean Power Plan hit. That one really kind of got people talking about the sequestration, carbon dioxide issue, right?
It really did. That was one of those items that it was there, but it really wasn't forefront in the minds of a lot of people until that legislation came through. And, I think we found very quickly that the industry in North Dakota was interested in trying to understand the opportunity and the challenges that did present. And, we worked hard. We had a number of different studies. We started out looking at things like what are the options out there and what's the status of the technology development. We looked at the different plants and what would fit with each of the plants in the state. And, I think it was an interesting time. It certainly is not over. And I think what we're seeing now, if you look at what's happened, a lot of the coal plants have just decided it was too much to deal with. And they went the easier path, which was to go to firing natural gas and wind turbines. I think in North Dakota, we've taken a different route. And as you see, Project Tundra is a perfect example of that. We've got, I think, companies there that have always been willing to take risks that they thought it was the right thing to do. And that's what we're seeing again. And they're to be commended for that, in my opinion. I
think Dakota's gasification took a lead role in the CO2 capture. And I often remember what Kent Jensen and Paul Suchet were looking at when they thought about the pipeline up into the oil fields of Canada.
Very cool. Very cool. Guys, I'm just looking at some of my notes that I had here. And one of the things, so first of all, just to give our listeners here a little background. So founded in 1987. So it's been a significant program that has made huge developments, right? We all agree on that. One of the legislatures that I wanted to talk about comes from in June 1990. The North Dakota voters approved Measure 3. Talk to me a little bit about that, because I feel that was probably a significant time in the history there for us.
That's about the time that I showed up and became involved. The funding that was provided enable us to look into other areas of research and provide more funding. One of the things that the Signer report did that I alluded to earlier was to identify certain potential areas for research and development that would be beneficial for the industry. And so when we issued some requests for proposals in the specific areas the Signer had identified. And out of those research activities and the proposals that we received, industry began to refocus their concern and interest. One of the key elements of the program was the involvement of the industry with research and the state, so that all the interests were pulled together. And the Research Council, I think, was a very good idea. We had a group of about 25, I think it was, that represented the various sectors in the state, and working together, they were able to identify opportunities and keep the program, I think, running. And it was key that that actually tied together not only the industry and the research community, but also the political interests in the state.
I think that's a real good point, Cliff. And you know, it is really always has been a very highly leveraged program. I mean, the state decided they wanted to be the catalyst to see some things happen, and they required cost share in all cases. And I think that's been a real godsend for the state, because we've been able to tap into the federal resources that have similar interests, and the companies have always had to be involved. And reality is, if you're going to have something which goes beyond the laboratory, you have to have the private sector involved. And that's been a key part of the success of this program from the very beginning, in my opinion.
I think you're right, Mike, and it's really a necessity. When I start and look at all of the programs that we're running, having industry involved, if they have an investment, they're going to follow through on the program development. And it was impossible for me in my position, and I'm sure the two Mikes felt that too, to be project manager for a number of different simultaneous projects. But with industry involved and with their money at risk, they were project managers as well.
What are the specific requirements? It's at least a 50-50 match. Is that how it works? Can one of you talk about that?
I don't have the exact language, but it is a matching. I think it's nebulous whether it is 50-50, but that's kind of the way that the minimum has been interpreted.
And one of the things I think that we always stated as we talked with people that were looking to propose is the higher the match, in other words, the ratio of state money to other sources, that's just a plus. I mean, it's a better investment for the state if they've got a minor play, and other groups are accepting a lot of the risks too. So there was, my understanding always had been that it had to be a minimum of 50-50, but more was better.
I know I see a lot of these projects, there's funding from the U.S. Department of Energy as well. I mean, they've been a partner in a number of these projects.
That's true, Geoff. And I think, you know, I know Mike Holmes can speak to this. We've had a number of conversations, and one of the things that was set up some years ago was an annual meeting with the NETL, just because there was a lot of common interests and a desire to know and understand what each side of the equation was working on, to see where the symbiotic relationship could be improved. And we've done that many times. I know most recently, Mike and I both were at a meeting with the director that just took over the NETL recently, and he said very clearly, he says, we see North Dakota as one of the best places for us to partner right now because of the state's interest in participating. So it's been a great relationship, and I think we hope it continues for a long time in the future.
Yeah, North Dakota really has been a leader in the country, I think you could say.
Absolutely.
Coal research, yeah.
And one of the challenges I saw when I was sitting where Mike Holmes is right now is that we had people from all over the country coming in saying, gee, can we work with you? And we had to remember to tell them, we work on lignite, not just on coal.
Mhm.
So, yeah, anybody that was trying to do something, they seemed to find a way to North Dakota to talk to us about it.
I think that just on that note, from my experience, and you guys know that I had a just baseline understanding, just being from North Dakota and that as my home state, of what basically went into our guests that we have in season 1, season 2. It seems that every guest I've spoken to talks about how there is like not just a national presence, but really a global presence that we're creating by the things and the technology that we're doing. And I think that's something that is so cool to basically not boast on, but be proud of in North Dakota, specifically with the, LEC and what we're doing here. We have a global presence, and that's pretty awesome.
I think you're exactly right, Kate. When I was there, we went to Australia to meet with a group over there that is focused on what they call their brown coal, similar to our North Dakota resource, but certainly not the same. And, that relationship continues today. Went to Germany, where they have their brown coal, same thing. Always anxious to see where we can work together to achieve, our common goals. And I think that continues today.
Mm-hmm.
I think also one of the things unique about North Dakota is I saw that the key individuals, the governor,
Mm-hmm.
the attorney general, and the agriculture commissioner continue to support the program. And that really was helpful as we move forward.
I can agree with everything that's been said more. And Mike, that continues. North Dakota has everyone moving in the same direction, and that's recognized not only across the U.S., but as Kate mentioned, internationally. So that, those calls you talk about with technology developers wanting to work with North Dakota, I got 2 of those yesterday. And that meeting that we talked about, Brian Anderson, the director of the National Energy Technology Laboratory, he came to North Dakota for the second of 2 meetings we had last year. And so we have that innovative spirit in North Dakota, that industry involvement, the technology development opportunity with the legislators continuing to work with us in the state. And so it's just a strong partnership. As Mike Jones said when I was coming on, it's an epitome of a state industry partnership. And it's just been so successful. As you go through the history, we talked about the start being reclamation. Then it became the primary emissions, which were well taken care of. So the sulfur and nitrogen emissions, particulate. And then when it moved into mercury capture, North Dakota led the nation and frankly the world in how to remove the toughest component of the mercury and other trace elements. And then a lot of the results that we came up with were used by others. And now we're working on the carbon management side. And similar to everything else, we take a challenge like you mentioned the Clean Power Plan, Geoff. It became, all right, at first it's a challenge, but then we said, wait a minute, this could be an opportunity. And you look at the enhanced oil recovery opportunity in the state. When you look at the carbon management side, if you start with the baseline, which is the economic impact that NDSU calculates every 2 years for the state of North Dakota of the lignite industry, it's $5.7 billion of economic impact.
Wow.
14,000 jobs that are directly and indirectly related to the lignite industry in the state. So then you say, all right, what would carbon management do to that? And if you said the 5 largest power plants, so the EERC worked with NDSU to take that study beyond just the lignite industry as it is today and add the carbon management side. If you said, if we captured CO2 from the 5 largest power plants and 1 of them were used for enhanced oil recovery and the other 4 for geologic storage, that would be an additional 8,000 full-time jobs.
Wow.
And then Yeah, it's incredible. And then if you have 5 of them eventually producing that CO2 for an enhanced oil recovery, then it goes up to 15,000 full-time jobs. So, North Dakota is a great state for innovation. We've got the ag and the energy industries that all link together. And so we just need to continue the great work that these two and others started and look at the opportunity side while we look at the challenges.
One thing that occurs to me about all three of you that, bottom line, you're basically scientists, right? I mean, you're comfortable in the lab, you do research, but the thing about what you do is it's inextricably linked to politics. So each of you at some point in your career have had to make that trip to Washington, D.C. or to the Capitol in Bismarck and do a little bit of lobbying. I'm sure you just enjoyed the heck out of that, right?
I felt more comfortable in the lab than I did in the legislature, but I've been forced to do all of them.
It was part of the job. And I think if you are a researcher, there is always going to be some politics. I mean, you're trying to sell your ideas, talk about the value they will have or do have right now. And that's part of what you have to do.
I bet it had to be frustrating at times, though, trying to communicate some of the complex things you're dealing with. I'm not going to say legislators aren't too bright, but sometimes it's tough to get your point across, isn't it?
Well, any field has the jargon which goes with the field. And, you have to get comfortable with that to really, and you're right, Geoff. I mean, you go into somebody that has never dealt with any of the issues that we're talking about in detail, it is a challenge. But, I think it's one that we've tried to do and accomplish over the years, in particular with legislators. When I was there, we were able to get some additional funding, and we had to sit down and talk to them. Had to talk to them in a way they understood. And it's not easy, but I think it's an important part of the job.
Right.
In North Dakota legislature.
I think it was unique when I was there. The legislature always talked to in North Dakota, and if you put it in the right terms, they would understand it, grasp it, and would be proponents for you. So one thing I really liked about working with the people in North Dakota is they would sit and listen and understand.
Yeah.
So it became easier to try to influence politicians.
Yeah, I would agree with what Cliff's saying. The North Dakota legislators are incredible. They understand things and they look at everything from the right perspective.
And they do their homework.
I'd like to thank Geoff for not pointing out the common myth that scientists are not good communicators. You blame the audience instead of us. The director of the ERC said, "Mike, you're an extrovert." I said, "How do you figure that?" And he said, "Well, you look at my shoes when you talk to me." So we've got a reputation for not communicating well because of that jargon, but it's part of our job is to learn how to
That's
get
right.
that information out there.
One thing we've got to talk to you guys about before we wrap up the podcast. I think all of you can see that. I mean, the results of the war on coal are still out there. I mean, it was temporarily suspended with the election of Donald Trump, but there's obviously still a lot of pressure on the industry to deal with carbon dioxide and the future of coal. So I guess I wanted all of you to just kind of give your perspective on, where is the future headed for the lignite industry? There are a lot of pitfalls out there, probably.
Well, I think right now the greatest threat is the threat that's centered around CO2 and global warming. I think that if the regulations that are going to be written are placed equally among all the forces that create the energy, and that is if you apply the CO2 regulations to petroleum, gas, whatever, equally to you apply them to lignite, then I think lignite has a good future. We cannot turn away from fossil energy. And so the matter is just how are we going to shape it and care for it as it moves forward.
The one thing I need to mention is 24/7 power, right? I mean, that's the important thing, Cliff. People need to understand we can't, this 100% renewable idea is, in my estimation, it's pure fantasy unless we have some sort of storage breakthrough. We've got to have that baseload power.
I think you're right, Geoff. That's key. It is baseload, and that's one of the great advantages of the lignite and the coal industry. It gives you that base load. You want to have electrical power every time you want it, not just when the wind blows or the sun shines. You want it all the time.
I think that's a key issue. And you know, in addition to the CO2, I think the other challenge we see right now is cheap gas. And that is a problem for us. But you know, one of the things that coal offers that cheap gas does not is storage. You can pile 3-4 months worth of fuel next to the plant. You've got a pipeline, and if that is interrupted, they're down. They're down right now. And that's something that is being discussed. I think you're right, Geoff, that there is a real need for that base load dispatchable power. And I do believe that at some point in time, we may have better storage options, but we don't today. I mean, they just aren't there right now in a way that's commercially viable at the size we need to support the grid. So that is a key issue for us going forward. Once again,
Michael?
North Dakota industry is ahead of the game. I mean, Project Tundra, here we go. Right now, they're looking at $1 billion investment in a plant, and innovative in the sense that they would have it such that they could go from one unit to the other so they could stay on 100% of the time in providing a CO2 source. Great way to go at it. And I think those are the kinds of things that need to happen. Because as we've seen before, when we tried to, as you do it for a while, you get better. Prices go down.
I think price is a key, and I think coal and lignite is going to stay at a low cost basis. I think natural gas and petroleum are going to fluctuate. And so it's going to become, sometimes, the availability and cost of natural gas is going to be a real issue.
I think, Mike Holmes, you talked about the need to communicate before. That's really part of the challenge going forward is to educate the public about just how electricity works. I mean, Mike Jones, you said earlier that, you know, it's the only product that's consumed the instant it's created, right? So the public needs to understand just how this works and you know, again, that need for baseload generation.
Oh, Mike, I think you're on mute there.
You got to unmute Mike Holmes.
Oh, my wife likes it. But you know, that's just a perfect point, Geoff, because there's some key points that decision makers need to understand. And so it's on us to get that information in front of them. Some of them are things like, you know, we think everyone understands, but the world coal supply, about a quarter of the available coal in the world is in the United States. And now when you look at the coal usage, it's about 10% of the coal usage is used in the United States. So we're using a fraction of our available supply. Another key point out there is you can't have intermittent power if you don't have baseload. And then you have to think of things from the perspective of all angles, not just yourself. So the leadership needs to understand that there's low-income residents that can't afford a cost increase in power. And then decide between food, medicine, or heating their homes. And so it's critical to them, and it's also very critical to industry. To keep the United States industry competitive, they not only need to keep that low-cost available electricity, but they need reliability that both Cliff and Mike talked about. You can't shut down your operation because there's no intermittent power available at a given time. You need to keep operating and maximize your people and your equipment at all times in order to be cost effective. If you look at the coal use in the world, Asia Pacific is about 3/4 of the coal use. And so the other point to make is the technologies that we've developed for things like sulfur, particulate, mercury control before, they're being used elsewhere in order for them to use coal. So if we want to manage something globally like CO2, then the technology that we're looking at developing today can be used elsewhere. But again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of keeping the cost down and the availability of power high for our industry and our people. And if you want to look back recently, we had what they call, I don't know the difference of the two, but the polar vortex and the bomb cyclone were two events that both needed that coal-fired power. It was too cold for the wind turbines to operate. It was too cold for the natural gas systems to run. And so the only thing feeding the grid at the time when we needed that power the most was the coal-fired power. The last point I want to make, and it references something Geoff talked about earlier, and that was you get to some level of intermittent power on the grid and you end up with a complexity. And there's studies out there that have been done and are ongoing. And the number that's out there the most is about 30% of intermittent power. And then you start seeing increased complexity and increased cost. Well, North Dakota is at about 30% renewable right now. And we're just below 30%. And if you continue to increase that intermittent power or decrease that baseload power, then you hit that point in the grid where the costs start going up very, very rapidly. And the complexity is part of the reason for that. So you deal with the complexity and the cost, and especially increased transmission costs as well. And so we have to really be mindful of that and not let things go too far to the point where then we all pay the price.
If I could just jump in and offer another comment that I think might be important at this stage too. Geoff, you said, what's the future of coal? I think it goes beyond power though too. We are seeing value propositions with coal that make a lot of sense. When you talk about the CO2 issue, that can become a positive if you're able to look at the beneficial uses of CO2, which include things like enhanced oil recovery, because now you've got another revenue stream, which is going to be a positive for everyone. But it's not just the CO2. Right now, we're looking carefully at rare earth elements. What we're finding is that our lignites in North Dakota became basically a sponge that held some of those rare earth elements in an attractive way for extraction and use. And if you've got a computer, if you've got a cell phone, if you want to think about a wind turbine, you're going to have rare earth elements. Right now, they come from China. And they are by far the largest supplier. Well over 80% of the total world supply of rare earth elements come from China. Well, I don't know about you, but that's not a real comforting thing for me right now. We got some real issues going with the Chinese, and they decide one day that they're not going to send any more over here. That's not a real good thing for us. Our economy is going to struggle real significantly, because that's a key part of what makes us go today. And that's just one part. The Great Plains, the success of Great Plains was not at producing natural gas. It's all the other products that they've got right now, which make better financial sense. And so we've got a resource which is a very low-cost carbon. And that's what lignite is. It's a low-cost source of carbon. And we are a carbon-based economy. That becomes an opportunity that we need to take better advantage of, in my opinion, in the future.
I think that's one of the things. I think that's one of the things that is so important to Geoff and I both as hosts of this podcast, just because, especially with my generations, younger generations, I feel there is not education on what what lignite and our coal that does for our economy. And because of what we have right now in a political environment across our country, now more than ever, we need to be educated and understanding of what role that coal plays in our economy on a global scale as well too, and make sure that we're making educated decisions when we speak about it, which is one of the reasons I went into this. I want to be educated when I talk and speak about certain things like we're talking about today. And if we don't have that understanding and that education to our general public, they don't understand the role and how important it is in our everyday life. You know, the reliability that we have with this coal is unmatched.
You know, I just want to say, you probably notice it, that those of us who've been in the position and in Mike Holmes now, we're pretty passionate about this. We think this is a critical issue. When you decided to go into the science field, you know, most of us kind of looked at it as we hope we can make a difference and do something that's really going to change society for the better. And it doesn't end just because you lose your, you know, you move from your job to retirement. When I took the job, the person who had it before me died in a car accident. So there was nobody there to mentor me. Cliff came in, Harvey Ness came in. They spent time making sure that I understood how that program worked so that I could be successful. Mike came in. I've been trying to help him, and that's not very hard to do because he knows everything he needs to know. But, you know, it's something that you feel pretty passionate about when you put this as your career. This is your life's work. And we think it's important. We think it's critical for society going forward.
Absolutely.
Just to add to that, Mike and Cliff continue to help me, and says very much appreciated. And just to take off on that, emerging markets or other value-added opportunities for using our vast lignite supply, which, by the way, I don't think we mentioned. We talked about a quarter of the world's supply of coal being in the United States. In North Dakota, we have an 800-year supply plus of the lignite that we're using. And so if you look at the emerging markets efforts that is going on federally now for use of coal, we've got so many of those that are already commercially operational in North Dakota. We've got a lot of them, again, as Mike mentioned, due to DGC. At Dakota Gas, they make 3 different types of fertilizer out of the coal up there. They make straight anhydrous ammonia, and then what they call Daxol is ammonium sulfate. And they sell every bit of that they can make, as well as their newest, which is the urea, the dry fertilizer. And those are just, there's many examples of commercial products up at Dakota Gas. We've got the work going on putting together a commercial activated carbon for things like water purification, for mercury capture, things like that is happening at Valley City. When we go around, we've heard statements like, well, you can't gasify lignite. And we kind of chuckle because Dakota Gas has been gasifying lignite for decades. And so once again, you know, North Dakota is a good example of where you can make a lot of this stuff happen. And the rare earth element work has been mushrooming in the last couple of years. We've got very good projects going, and they're looking at getting closer and closer to that commercial opportunity. And the DOE has just put out a notice of intent to put a multi-phase program in place for up to $120 million of rare earth element work. And wow. Again, another example where we can leverage the state's investment and the state's talents in a very significant way. So there's another great opportunity for looking beyond just the power generation, which we depend on so heavily in this region. And we look at those other possible uses of our resource. Yeah, I joked with one group from Minnesota that we could make a whole car out of lignite, from the magnets, the batteries, and everything. And then the guy in the front row said, you know where I'm a representative of in Minnesota? And I said, no, where's that? He said, the Iron Range. He said, I want you to keep using our steel. but we can make the bodies of cars, everything, every part of a car, you can start thinking of using lignite as a resource for.
I think you make some good points, Mike, that the future of lignite may be not only in power generation, but also in the other products and byproducts that we can gather from this processing of the fuel.
Yeah, back in your time, Clifford, you worked on Leonardite, application of lignite to the soil to make agricultural more effective.
Yes, that was some people in the state were really very interested in Leonardite and have been for a long time.
Yeah,
And Clifford worked a lot on synthetic fuels from lignite coal. Even before he joined the council, he was working on that when I was at the research center.
Yeah, that was our first meeting, wasn't it, Mike?
That's correct.
So,
yeah. When I was in Australia, the guy after me presented on Leonardite, and he said, and by the way, Mike, that's from named after Professor Leonard from the University of North Dakota.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yep.
Wow. Well, thank you guys, man. Geoff, I mean, I feel like my brain's just wow with everything we've touched on today, you guys. And I feel like we probably could talk for another hour at least on different topics. I really appreciate everything you shared with us. Geoff, anything else we want to touch on before we let these guys go?
The future for coal is out there. There are going to be bumps around the road, but coal's got a long future ahead of it yet. I'm confident of that.
Yeah, totally agree, Geoff. Thank you.
thank you,
Thanks,
Jay.
gentlemen.
Mike and Mike, it's good to see you again. You take care.
You
Yeah.
too.
Glad to meet you.
Okay.
Thanks,
Take
guys.
care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Mind, America's Lignite Energy Podcast. For more information on lignite energy in North Dakota, visit lignite.com.